Well, good evening. It's good to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to come and share, and spent the afternoon in the wonderful town of Lexington. Came up, I was in the town of Enville, Tennessee, if you know where that is. I didn't until this morning, but anyway, I was there preaching at Enville Baptist Church this morning, and here tonight, and I'll be at the pastor's conference in the morning. And it's a busy time of the year for us. It's Mother's Day offering. I'm in the pulpit just about every Sunday somewhere. And my mother reminds me of that I've not been around for Mother's Day now. This will be the 9th Mother's Day I've missed. She keeps count. My wife's a little more lenient towards it, but my mother continues to always kind of poke and prod, and I just say, there's nothing I can do about that. But I'm always glad to get the opportunity to share and to preach, to combine those two things I love to do. And so I'm grateful for Brother Lynn to give me the opportunity to come and share with you tonight. If you have your Bibles, I would encourage you to open them to 1 John chapter 3. Probably everyone is well aware of John 3:16. If not, certainly now, thanks to Tim Tebow, I'm sure we're pretty certain what John 3:16 is. But when it comes to 1 John 3:16, we might not nearly know that passage as well. And I want to kind of share and camp out in a couple verses there in 1 John 3. But I wanted to share with you my journey to the children's home. God called me or saved me as a young boy at the age of 6. I was called into the gospel ministry at the age of 13. I was on my first church staff at the age of 19. I'm sure that wasn't wise, but I was there anyway and serving the Lord. And God eventually opened the doors for me to go to college and eventually complete my master's at Mid-America Baptist Theological Seminary. My wife, Christy, and I have been married for almost 16 years. We have 2 children. One's going to turn 10, unbelievable, in the middle of this month, and my other one's going to turn 2 at the end of this month. So it's pretty interesting all the time at our house. As you can imagine, having an almost 2-year-old in the house running around, we had kind of gotten past that and kind of gotten in our rut, and then all of a sudden God saw fit to kind of give us a game changer there, and she certainly is that, but we enjoy having her. God called me into the youth ministry field. That's where I spent most of my time, and then I eventually pastored a small little rural church in North Mississippi, and so I love country churches, and this church is beautiful, by the way. The redecoration and the renovations y'all have done here is just a fabulous place. I don't remember it previously, but I remember hearing about the fire and all that had happened when I was coming up here to one of the pastor meetings. And so I walked in and I was asking Brother Huber, I said, this is new, isn't it? He said, yeah, it's real new. So y'all done a great job with it. But after about 8.5 years, God called my wife and my family to the Boys Ranch. I came as the program director, and then a few years after that became the campus director. My job is basically to provide leadership and supervision to our house parents, our social work staff, our secretary staff, to go out and speak and represent children's home and churches and to civic groups, to the courts. Also to make sure that I'm handling all of our training, all of our licensing. We're about to go through our state licensing. Just so you'll know, last time we finished our state licensing, we go through it once a year. That's independent licensing through the Department of Children's Services. The lady walked out and I said, man, it's kind of a quick licensing. That's usually a 3 or 4 hour kind of deal. And she was done in an hour and a half, and she turned to me and she said, when it's right, it's right. And when it's wrong, and it's right. And so you can take great solace in the fact that when an unbiased independent contractor walks through your facility, they're seeing that it's run right and it's done in a manner that would please God. And so we were grateful for that. But also probably one of my greatest joys is I work with the families to get the boys into our care. So I'm the first person you talk to, or sometimes my secretary will take the message, but if you're going to get anywhere, you're going to eventually talk to me. And I'm working with those families, kind of figuring out what's going on, interviewing their boys, interviewing them, working with them, and getting them to a place where our team will evaluate them and see if we have a placement for them. And so I'm right there on the front lines meeting those people and seeing that. And I want you to understand that it is my great honor and privilege to be your ambassador to hurting families. I represent you. I represent the Tennessee Baptists. Say we care, and that's not an honor I take lightly or a privilege that I shirk from. I'm glad to be able to do it. I'm honored and humbled to be able to do it. But I want you to know we're answering the call for hurting families and children, not only just in Tennessee, but we're answering that call all across the United States, truthfully. We've received calls from Oregon, from South Carolina, from Michigan, from Chicago, from Las Vegas. We've taken in kids from Missouri, from Mississippi, and all parts of Tennessee, not just West Tennessee. I've got kids that live in Chattanooga, Gallatin, Murfreesboro, you name it. All the way up 51 corridor, out 64, out 40, it's all around. And so you, as Tennessee Baptists, are touching literally the United States of America through the ministry of the Double B Boys Ranch, and as a whole, the ministry of the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home. And so you may not even have realized how far your touch goes. And so we're working with those families, trying to get them in to our facility. And then the other responsibility I have is I counsel with our guys, trying to help them work through their issues and their situations from a biblical perspective so that they can understand how to make life changes in their life. And so let us look in the text here for just a minute. It says there in 1 John chapter 3, verse 16, it says this: "By this we know love, because he, being Jesus, laid down his life for us, and we also ought to lay down our lives for the brethren." If we ever wonder whether we ought to sacrifice, all we have to do is look at Jesus, and the question's answered very quickly. It's a complete sacrifice. It's a giving sacrifice. It's without any conditions, without any strings, or without any hesitation. Jesus laid down his life, and he's asking us to be willing to do whatever he calls us to do in the case of our brethren. And he goes on to further and says, "But whoever has this world's goods and sees his brother in need and shuts up his heart from him, how does the love of God abide in him? My little children, let us not love in word or in tongue, but in deed and in truth." What is that need? Well, I see that need all the time. We probably get about 12 to 15 phone calls a month for placement at our facility. Probably one of the greatest disappointments is the fact I can't help all those kids. I would love to, but ultimately, truthfully, some of them are beyond our ability. They need higher care, they need a specialized care treatment, but we get about 12 to 15 phone calls a month. We can hold up to 24 young men in our homes. We keep 8 in a home, and if that seems small to you, come down and spend some time with 8 teenage boys in a house, and I'll promise you, you'll figure out that that's plenty in a home. And they have a set of house parents who can have up to 2 of their own children there as well, and so you're talking about 10 or 12 folks in a home. They're about 5,000 square foot homes, and each boy shares a room with another resident there, and then the house parents kind of have their quarters off to the side as well. And so we're working to integrate those families. And we get calls from all different walks of life. One of the things I'm seeing recently is we're getting a lot of calls from grandparents. We've got a lot of grandparents raising grandkids. Their own kids haven't done what they need to be doing, and the grandkids are just kind of left in the cracks, and grandma and grandpa are doing what is right and trying to reach in there. But really, let's face it, God designed parents to raise kids and grandparents to spoil kids, and not the opposite of that. And so grandparents a lot of times are kind of waving the flag saying, I'm in over my head. I raise kids, and I'm ill-equipped to raise grandkids, and so we're reaching out to them. See a lot of single moms. Life is dealt severe blows, and divorce is rampant in America today, and so you have these single moms trying to raise kids by themselves, and you got 3 or 4 kids, and the teenage boy's the oldest kid, and instead of being a help, he's a hindrance. And so she's crying out for help. She's 5'4", weighs 100 pounds, and he's 6'2" and weighs 230 pounds. And so when she says do something, he says make me. It doesn't go real well. So we get those calls. We get calls from parents who are just struggling, just trying to figure out what it is. And when you meet these families and you meet these boys, you start to unravel why there's problems in the home. We have several young men on our campus who really are there because of their issues, but they started from someone else's issues. You see, as soon as you have a breakdown, and I'm not here to beat up on folks who've had divorce, that's not my point, but you cannot dismiss the impact that has on the lives of children. And so they right there have a loss of either a dad or a mom. We have 21 boys on our campus right now. 19 of them do not have a positive relationship or any relationship with their biological father. Let me tell you something. God ordained fathers to make an impact in the lives of their children. And for those guys, it's a loss. Some of those guys are adopted, and so they have a relationship with their adopted father. Some of them have a relationship with a stepmom, but many of them have no father figure whatsoever. That's one of the greatest impacts of the Boys Ranch is that they spend quality time with godly men who are teaching them what it means to really be a man in light of what the Bible says, not what society says. And so they don't have that relationship. Some of our families are messed up with drugs. Have one young man whose mom is doing drugs. That's why he's in our care, and she dates a man who has a meth lab inside his home. And so he could stay there. Have another young man who was living with his real dad. His dad went to court one day to get some documents, and instead of getting those documents, he saw the county clerk's purse on the thing, grabbed the purse, went and made some charges, and he's running from the law. DCS picked him up, gave him to his mom. His mom said, I really don't want him, but I'll try it for the weekend. The DCS lady called me on Friday, said, be ready to have him on Monday. And sure enough, come Monday morning, I was traveling to Dyersburg to pick him up. And now she's in jail for writing bad checks. Had another young man who lost his mom in an automobile accident in 5th grade. His dad was morbidly obese and had health problems, and he died in 2011, was living with his great-grandmother, and she passed away the 2nd day of this year. And he was left with nobody except a great uncle who was incapable of caring for him. Those are the kind of situations and the needs that are very common. Those aren't atypical, they're common in the lives of our young men. And I'm reminded, I was blessed to have been raised in a Christian home with Christian parents who, when the church doors were open, I was there. And I'm grateful for that, because I know that if those things I just mentioned had happened in my life, I can only imagine what my reaction would have been. And so for these young men, it's anger, it's feeling slighted, it's feeling lost, it's feeling like you don't have a sense of who you are as a man, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're ill-equipped to figure it out. They respond inappropriately, they don't have anybody setting any boundaries for them, any structure for them, and so the first place they find any structure or boundary is in the schoolyard. Finally, somebody says, you can't do that without paying a price. But by then, most of the time, they're not listening to them, because most of them are dominated by predominantly women, and they've already shut women out because they've heard that single mom talk forever and ever and ever and ever, and they don't listen to that. And so the next boundary they find is the law. And then all of a sudden, they get in the system. All of a sudden, they're a number. All of a sudden, their life starts to just turn a pattern over and over and over and over again. And that's where we're trying to jump in. Someone asked me the other day, how would you describe your ministry we were doing a little radio ad, and so we had to do a little 10-second byline, and I was working on that, and I'm not the most creative person, but they asked me, how would you describe your ministry? And I describe it like this. We're giving folks a second chance, we're giving boys a second chance who never really had a first chance. And that's really the truth. If they had had a first chance, if they'd had a really good upbringing, chances are they would have never darkened the doors of our ranch. But the fact that they didn't causes them to have a need. And as Tennessee Baptists, we decided we would be the voice to fit that need. Now, you may be wondering, is it really necessary for Tennessee Baptists to get involved in that? Is it really necessary for us to have facilities? Why can't someone else do it? Well, that's a good question. And the question is this: no one else does it like we do it. Now, how is that? Here's how. We look at that family. When they make that phone call, if it's not the first question, it's the second question they ask every time. For the last 8.5 years when I answer that phone, if it's not the first question, the second question is this: how much does it cost? And for the last 8.5 years, I've answered the same way every time. Due to the generosity of Tennessee Baptists and those who believe in what we're doing, there is no set fee for this ministry. You cannot imagine the source of relief and hope. Because see, I know what they've done. They've looked everywhere else before they called us, because we had that thing called Baptist in our name. And so if they get help from anybody else, they're going to do it. And about 4 or 5 years ago, just to have some research, just to see what it would cost, I called every residential facility in the state of Tennessee for boys, or would at least accept boys, just to say, hey, I got a teenage boy, I need a place. Can you tell me how to get him in and what it cost me? I was shocked. If you don't have insurance, and I'll talk about that in a second, but if you just got to pay cold hard cash to place your kid in a facility, you better be ready to have between $12,000 and $50,000 a year. Now, I don't know about you, but I could write those checks, but they would bounce higher than I am tall. But folks don't have that kind of money. Because a lot of our families, not only do they have problems with their kids, but they're having economic problems and all those things. Not all of them, Because let me tell you something, family problems know no economic boundaries. No, don't get me wrong, I've had lawyers who've placed their kids in our care. But primarily, a lot of times you see economics go with the breakdown in the family. And so families don't have that kind of money. And you say, well, what about insurance? Well, let me tell you, when's the last time you went to the hospital? What happens at the hospital? The moment you even appear to be getting better, what do they do? Say, it's been nice seeing you, it's time for you to go. Well, it's the same way in the facility. As a matter of fact, they put pressure on the people who run the facility saying, you better get these people right. And they have a little grid, and their little grid says, you've been so many days, and then you got to go. Or lastly, you can give up custody of your kid. You can say, okay, Department of Children's Services, you can have my kid. Now, eventually, maybe you might be able to get him back, and you might not. I don't know. But the beautiful thing that sets the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home apart and Boys Ranch apart is this. We don't take your insurance, and we don't take your kid custody-wise, and we ask you to pay for whatever you can just pay. No one else is doing that, folks. Nobody else is doing that. Now, the question to be asked is how can we do it? We do it because of your faithfulness. That's how we do it. Because I promise you, the gulf between what it takes to take care of a kid and how much those families are paying, it's huge, and it just gets wider and wider. Our Mother's Day offering that your pastor spoke about earlier, it comprises about 36% of our entire operating budget. Our budget statewide is $6.9 million a year. It's roughly about $50,000 to $55,000 per kid per year to take care of them. And most that I have of a parent giving is about a couple $100 a month. So you can see the huge gap. But I answer that phone call the same way with the same confidence because for the last 120 years, Tennessee Baptist has risen to the cause. They've met the challenge. They've answered. Sure, we've had to make cuts and we've had to make adjustments just like anybody else, and a lot of churches have. But we haven't had to do things that have hurt the care of our kids. But the cost of things and the need continues to increase, doesn't decrease. I was speaking in one church and a lady who was familiar with our ministry, she said, I want to ask you something. She said, when is Tennessee Baptist going to stop asking for money? And I laughed and I said, when we stop offering to take care of kids for whatever their families can pay. Because until then, we're always going to be in need of money. We're always going to be working at a deficit. We're always going to be at a faith-based element in our ministry because you just can't do it any other way. And I'm glad we don't do it any other way. Because if we did, we'd miss a bunch of kids. You know, there was a period of time, and I won't go into all the details, but there was a period of time we were taking state kids in and not taking state money. We've never taken a dime of state money, but we were taking their kids in. Kids who actually were custody part of the Department of Children's Services, we were taking them in, but we never took a dime of their money and didn't have any plans to. Because here's what we know. God knows how to raise kids better than the government does, and so therefore we don't want the government, because the government gives their money, they have strings attached to it. And we want to be able to do what we want to be able to do. And that main thing that we want to be able to do is we want to be able to share the love of Jesus Christ. We want to be that laying down the life. Because we realize that truly change of any nature, the true change will come when they come to a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. You know, we are Baptist. We don't shy from that. We don't apologize for that. We don't back down from that. But we also don't bully people with it and beat people over the head with it either. We bring in families, and I'll be honest with you, they wouldn't darken the doors of this church, and don't feel bad, they wouldn't darken the doors of any church. But as I said earlier, they've made those phone calls, they've typed on the internet, and they figured out they'd have no other options except the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home or lose their kids more than likely. And they're willing to come to our facility and to sit down and listen to us. And here's what we ask. Our guys go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. They're the most faithful crew you would have in your church. In addition to that, they have a family devotion every night in their home. I wonder how many families in this church would say, every night we have a family devotion, we're not in church. I bet the number would be small. Because as a parent of two kids, I can tell you how challenging it is for me to do that, let alone others. And so they have that background. Plus they have men and women who are living God in front of them. Certainly not perfect, and that's okay, because if we were perfect, we'd be setting up something that was false. And so, man, we make mistakes, we apologize for it. We ask for forgiveness. We teach them those things. And so all we ask them to do is come into our facility, be respectful, and listen. That's it. If you make a decision for Christ, that's between you and the Lord. But you're going to be respectful and you're going to listen. And you'd be amazed at how many kids shortly thereafter coming in our program give their heart and life to Jesus Christ. And a lot of it's because they've never experienced God. They never realized there's a God who loves them just like they are, but refuses to leave them that way, who would be willing to lay down his life for them. They've never heard that. I remember a young man we took in from the Portland area right above Nashville. He'd never been to church in his life. And he was going to First Baptist Millington there, and they had little jumbo screens on both sides there. And during their welcoming, they would just pan the crowd. I don't know why they did that. Maybe it's not a good idea. I'm not sure. But anyway, they did that. And this young man was standing there. He didn't know anybody, so he really wasn't shaking anybody's hand. He probably really wasn't that excited to be there. And all of a sudden, the video camera panned in on him, and he realized it. And the next thing you know, he's going, hey, hey, he's jumping all down. Man, house parents can't get to him fast enough. But it just reminded me that the kid had no idea how to act in church. He had no idea. He'd never been there. I had another young man who was in our care, who was coming in our care. I was interviewing him, and I was asking him, what do you think about God? Because you're going to go to church, you're going to have family devotions, I just want to know what you think about it. Here's what he said. He said, it'd be a lot easier if there was just one God. But all these multiple gods, he said, I just can't figure it out. And I said, well, I think if you come to our facility, we'll be able to help you kind of sort through the details. About 3 or 4 months later, he gave his heart and life to Christ. And we were talking with his mother, who I quickly understood why he had the confusion in his life. She said, Troy, I'm not real crazy about this Jesus thing. And I said, yes, ma'am, I'm aware of that. She said, but you know what? And I'll call his name Adam. She said, but here's the thing. I know Adam's getting the best care he could possibly get right there. Now, I don't want you to miss that. Here's a lady who's telling you she's lost, doesn't care anything about Jesus, who's willing to leave her child in a residential facility that's going to teach him about Jesus Christ because he's getting the very best care that he possibly could have. I know of no other reason than that for the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home to exist. That lost people would say, I'll put my kid there, even though it may take a chance of them finding out about that Jesus thing. It's worth the chance. That's the opportunity we get. That's the need that we get to reach. That's the need you get to be a part of to help us do that. The young men that we take into our care range anywhere from 11 to 18 years old. They can stay for however long they want to stay, but typically they stay about 18 months to 24 months. Now, a lot of times when families ask me, that first question is, how much does it cost? The second question always is how long does it take? And when I say 18 months, there's this big gulp. And I try to explain to them that we're not looking for you to dance through a couple of hoops and then send you home. We're looking for heart change, and that takes a while. It's kind of funny to think, hey, you've lived in dysfunctionality for 12 years, and we're supposed to be able to change it in 6 weeks. That's crazy. Now, I don't say it that way, understand, but I'm thinking that in my mind. And so we want to know, and we want to see, and we want to test it out. We want them to go home on visits and see if if they're putting those changes into place so that we can, to the best of our ability, be assured that that's going to be a successful reunification as possible. Obviously, we don't have a lot of control over some of those things, and so we want to do everything we can with that kid before we let him go. Some of our young men stay till they graduate. I'm proud of the fact that right now we have 5 men, and I do call them men because when you lay down your life for your country, you're a man. And we have 5 men who are serving our United States military currently as I speak. They're our boys. They're all across the United States and all across the world, really. But the interesting thing is this. When they get leave, you know where they come home to? They come back to the ranch because that's home. They'll go visit their family, and they all got family, but they're going to come back to the ranch because that's the place that they know is secure, and they know people care about them, and people love them. And it's the people who invest in their life when nobody wanted to invest in them, and they come back. So I'm proud of those guys. And when they went into that military, most of them went in the Army. We've got one guy that's in the Navy, one guy that's in the Air Force. When they went into there, they were head and shoulders above their peers because they had already been in a structured environment. They were used to people telling them what to do and holding them accountable to do it, all those things. And so many of them were able to soar very quickly up the ranks because they were already used to that. And then we have some of our young men who will stay and go to college. One of the hidden things about the children's home is this. If a child stays with us, we'll put him through college. Our goal is for him to leave college with a degree, whether it be associate's, bachelor's, whatever it be, VOTEC training, whatever it may be, debt-free. We don't want them having any student loans to pay off. We want them to be able to move out and do the things they need to do. It's incredible opportunity for these young men. Many of these young men never graduate, nobody in their families graduated from high school. Had a young man, we took him from the Jackson area, and we had to put him in a private school to get some of his education things together there, a small little private school there in the Millington area, and he graduated, and his graduating class was 10 people. And so I tell him all the time, you tell people you graduate in the top 10 of your class. They don't have to know there's only 10 people. Doesn't matter. But he was the first person in his entire family that had ever graduated from high school. What a great honor. One of the things that we're trying to do is break cycles. Because if you don't break cycles, then the cycle just keeps going. Because what happens is that kid doesn't make right choices, he becomes married, he has kids, and then those kids don't, and then, pretty soon you can trace this thing 5, 6, 7 cycles back. And Jesus Christ is the generation curse breaker. And we're trying to break those curses through his power, through his strength. And some of our young men are able to go to college. Yesterday afternoon, we have a thing when a young man gets ready to graduate. It's called the blessing. We think it's biblical. And that is where we bless that young man. We send him out. And the most moving thing of that entire thing is the very last thing we do. When we've sung praises and said good things about him, eaten a meal with him, then our entire campus, all the boys, all the men, stand single file in a row and they walk past him and they shake his hand and call him sir. It's one of the most moving things that I've ever been a part of, but it's a validation that you have moved into a different position in life. And we respect you, we praise you, and we bless you for what you're doing. And we were able to do that with a young man yesterday. That young man, when he came to our campus, he's been with us 6 years. He was with the Bartlett campus 4 years before that. So 10 out of the 19 years of his life, he's been ours and yours. And when he came to our campus, he was diagnosed mentally retarded with an IQ of 69, which is right there on the borderline if you're any education folks out there. And typically we don't take kids who are diagnosed mentally retarded just because we're not able to handle the school requirements and those things, but we did on this particular occasion. And that young man is going to graduate here in about a week and a half with a regular diploma. It's already been accepted to Southwest Community College and is going to be able to have his path set. And you played a role in that. You had a piece of that. And so you're making differences in the lives of kids you don't know, but trust me, God knows what you're doing. And he's honoring that, and he's using that. Because a lot of these young men, they're behind academically. I had one young man several years ago, he sat on the couch for 10 months. He didn't even go to school. I said, what are you doing? I was just sitting on the couch. For 10 months? Yeah, man, I was just sitting on the couch. I was like, you gotta be kidding me. He's like, yeah, I was just sitting on the couch. I was just going to do the GED. I was just going to drop out. No, you're not going to drop out. You're going to be somebody. And we were able to get him moving in the right direction, get his academics moving. We provide something that these young men are missing. That's structure and security. You see, some parents think that the goal of parenting is to be their kid's friend. What a misnomer that is. Number one, they don't want you as a friend, and number two, they don't need you as a friend. They need you as a parent. And often what happens is parents don't set boundaries. They think, well, if I don't have rules and I don't have boundaries, then life's good. Let me tell you something. That's not what your teenager wants. They want to know what the boundaries are. Now, hear me. They'll cross them, but they want to know what they are. Because pretty soon, they'll stay within those boundaries often. Because there's security in knowing where the rules stop. And for a lot of our guys, they haven't known any boundaries. As I said earlier, until the law says you can't do that or school says you can't do that. But at the ranch, it's crystal clear. We have a saying, we want to over-communicate our expectations. You say, why is that? Well, here's the thing. I absolutely hate to hear somebody say, well, I didn't know. I don't know. Then maybe that doesn't grate on you. That grates on me. And so when I ask a young man, what did you do? So I don't know. I didn't know. So we make sure we eliminate I don't know. We communicate all of our expectations. So then there's only two responses that you can make then. I don't care or I forgot. But you can't say, I don't know. And if you don't care, we're going to give you consequences to help you care more. And if you forgot, we're going to give you consequences, going to help you remember better. But we're not going to say, I don't know. And so we are very passionate about communicating clearly. And so they know what's expected of them. They know what to expect from us. And that breeds security. Now for you, that may not mean a whole lot. But for them it is, because listen, they've been moving around. They've lived with this person, lived with that person, lived in a car for a while. We got evicted here. I mean, it's just chaos. staying up to 10, 12, 11 o'clock at night, got a computer in the room. I mean, just all kind of crazy stuff going on. And now there's a structure, there's a balance in there. You say, does it work? Well, I'll say this, our guys get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, they clean their room, make their bed, get ready, and catch a school bus at 6 a.m. in the morning. They go to school, they get them back at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, at 3 o'clock they're out at the work program. It's a 224-acre working cattle ranch. There's plenty of work to do all the time. We have 5 shops or 5 programs they're able to be in. We have a wood shop, a welding shop, a small engine shop, a horse program, and a cattle program. They go out and work. You say, well, why do they work? Well, we see 4 benefits of that. Number one, I don't have to tell you this, you already know it, but work ethic as a teenager today is pretty poor. I don't know why that is. I was thinking about that this morning since I had a lot of drive time. I was just wondering, why is that? I don't know if this is true or not. I hadn't had time to research it enough, but I think part of it is technology. Now, I'm a technology person. I like it. But I think we just made life so much easier that by virtue, we just miss some things. Now, I never had to carry my own water in or any of that stuff or pick cotton, that kind of, I never did that. But I would imagine that even if you didn't like it, some of that just rubbed off on you anyway. And some of that's just missing. We're trying to establish that work ethic. Why? Because we need it. We need people who don't mind going to work. We need people who want to work. So we're trying to establish that work ethic, especially among men. Certainly there are women who are breadwinners. We get that, we understand that, but predominantly in most families, the men are expected to go out and earn a living. We want to teach that work ethic. But also we want to teach value of a dollar. We pay them for their work. It's not slave labor, they get paid. They get paid based on their effort. And that's their money. They can spend how they want to, and we want them to do that. Why? Because here's what I found out. When they spend the ranch's money, they don't really care. But when they spend their money, they start caring a little more. Well, you know what? That's important. Because all the research I read says that if it's not the number one, it's the second cause of divorces in America was what? Finances. And it's because people don't value the dollar. They go spend on crazy stuff, and then all of a sudden they got dead out their ears and don't know how to deal with it. And so we want them to, in a small way, to learn the value of a dollar. We also have found out that men in general, but boys in particular, they don't do very good in counseling sessions. Just sitting across and you stare at them and they stare at you. But what we found is when they're ratcheting on something or painting something or hammering something, all of a sudden they talk a little more. Now we do the group therapy and we do individual counseling, but in addition to that, we know God ordains life object lessons while we're out there doing the work. And then lastly, the reason we do it is this. Every man in here will agree with this statement. There's something within a man who wants to know at the end of the day he's completed something. Now wives, if you may not understand it, but let me give you an illustration. Has your husband ever come to you and pointed out to you something he did? Absolutely, right? Why is that? Because he wants you to validate saying, I appreciate you doing that. I want you to know, honey, I got that one glass over there that was sitting there. I did that for you. And so it builds self-esteem. And it doesn't matter what it is, it builds self-esteem in our young men. And so we have them do that. And then they go into their home. A lot of times people think, well, do you all eat all together? No, we don't. We try to make it as much family style as it is, and so they eat in their own home. The only difference between your house and theirs is there's about 10 or 12 folks around the table. And that house mom's been cooking a meal all day long. I was giving a tour yesterday to a bunch of WMU ladies from Shiloh Baptist Association, and they were drooling over the kitchen and the pantry area, and then all of a sudden the reality hit them and said, well, this is really nice, but then I'd have to cook for all these boys. And I said, yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge. We don't hire bad cooks, so that's for certain, because these guys can eat a lot of food. They're preparing that meal, and then each one of those boys has a chore to do, dishes, pots, pans, whatever it may be. And then they have study time based upon what their academic needs are. And then they get a little bit of free time, nightly devotion, and they go to bed about 9:30 at night. And so it's highly structured. And that's to do so that they don't have to worry about, they can focus on themselves, because a lot of these guys, they've been having to take care of their brothers and sisters or even take care of their parents. And so they hadn't had time to focus on themselves, and we want them to focus on themselves. We're trying to teach them how to make good decisions while the cost is cheap. You make a bad decision at 14, that's one thing. You make it at 24, it's totally different. And so we want them to learn how to make good decisions. We teach them that life is full of choices. You make good choices, you get good consequences. You make bad choices, you get bad consequences. But here's the good news. You get to make the choice. We're going to hold you personally responsible for your decisions. I'm telling you, for the most part, that hasn't happened in their life. No, I don't want to hear about the teacher. I don't want to hear about your mom. I don't want to hear about your next door neighbor or your friend. I want to know what you did, because you're responsible for your actions. You get it right, you get credit. You get it wrong, you get consequences. We praise as much as we give out negative consequences, because both work. And so we're constantly trying to shape their decision-making skills. Because I can tell you, and research backs this up, teenagers aren't very good at making decisions. Sorry guys, it is what it is. And the reason is developmentally in their brain, and I don't want to bore you with brain news, but developmentally in their brain, their prefrontal cortex is not hardwired enough to make good decisions. And so that's why they need parents. And in our case, our boys need us, because their parents aren't able to do it. And so we try to work with those parents, try to develop parenting skills. I'm a certified trainer from Boys Town in what's called common sense parenting. And so we hold parenting classes sometimes for our people. We work on, here's how to give consequences, here's how to handle these situations, those kind of things, to try to help them be better equipped to work with their issues and work with their situations. But for us, it's an opportunity to really show the love of Christ. You know, he's the one that does the work. He just allows us to be a part of it. And we're out there meeting that need and working through that. But I want you to know, it's absolutely impossible for us to do what we do without you. And I'm not just talking about finances. Sure, that's huge. I mean, it takes money to make things work. There's no doubt about it. But I'll tell you something else we need more than your money. We need your prayers. You know, as a pastor, I know how Satan can get in a church, but I'm convinced that Satan has really started messing less with the church and messing more with the family. And what he does, he creates chaos in the family. He don't have to worry about church because it messes the church up. And so we're some of those people who are working in that intersection where he's messed things up. And it gets tough sometimes. You know, I often wondered why God would call me out of the pastorate and put me into this ministry. And what I figured out is that I'm just pastoring these people. The difference is, Brother Lynn, is I live with them. You know, when you get to go home, you're gone, but I stay there. I'm with them. I live on campus there. And so it's a community. And, you know, I don't have to tell you, as a church of believers, you put everybody together. Not everybody sees eye to eye all the time. And so we have to work to preserve our unity, to preserve our purpose, and work through conflicts and different strategies. We're all on the same page. We want to help kids, but it doesn't mean we always think we can get there the same way. But then in addition to that, we're working with the grips of where Satan has these young men. You know, and he's got them hooked to things. Some of our guys come in and they've got drug issues, they've got anger issues, they've got sexual issues, whatever it may be. They've been sexually abused, been physically abused, emotionally abused. So he's got them already warped up and wrapped up, and he doesn't want anybody unwrapping that and trying to get in there to bring some healing and hope in their life. And then we deal with their families. Some families love what we do and they love us and they work with us great, and some families hate us. I know that sounds crazy, but what happens is, as we work with their boys, we start to find out that the real source of the problem is not the young man, but it is his family. And when we start to poke and prod in there, sometimes people don't like it too much. And so we're in desperate, dire need of your prayers. God's got the money. I don't worry about the money. I don't. But I do worry that God's people won't pray enough. I'm worried sometimes I don't pray enough for this ministry. But not only your money and not only your prayers, but I would challenge you to ask God what he wants you to do personally by getting involved in our ministry. I tell people all the time, and I've been to every imaginable spot in West Tennessee, I believe. I've been raised in West Tennessee all my life, and I'm telling you, I find new places. You know, I was in this area before and got lost a couple of years ago trying to speak at a Mother's Day thing. I was 30 minutes late to a speaking engagement. I got lost in the woods in Darden, I believe. And I couldn't find my way out. I really couldn't. I said, Lord, it's just over. Just come get me. And praise God, I got out. But I've been into just about every place imaginable in West Tennessee. And here's what I found out. I can get to you. You know what that tells me? You can get to me. You know, if you have your money in the stock market, you're probably watching that investment. Now, maybe not. Maybe you decide the best way to handle that is just not to look at all, right? It's so depressing. Who wants to look at it? But more than likely, you're checking that. Well, you have an investment. It's called the Double B Boys Ranch. It's yours. It's not mine. It's ours. It's Tennessee Baptist. This is as much yours as it is mine. The only difference is you've allowed me to be there to work on your behalf. And so I want to encourage you to come. We love having people come on our campus. We'd love to have a group of y'all come. Don't have to do anything, don't have to bring anything, just to come, because I'm telling you, if you'll come on our campus, God will just do something in your life. He'll allow you to see things and touch your heart, and you don't know what God might do. Now, that might scare some of you. You might not be willing to come if God might do something. But I'd encourage you to come. We've asked church groups to come and prayer walk our campus. We'll give you a little guide, and you can come out and prayer walk our campus, because we believe in the power of prayer. But here's what I know: for the last 8.5 years, we can't do it without you. And I'm grateful. I want you to hear me. I'm so grateful for Tennessee Baptist. When I make that statement, I don't have any fear that you're not going to respond. I don't have any fear that you're not going to come through, because you have for so long. And several years ago, people asked me, and I'll close with this. They asked me, Troy, how successful is the Boys Ranch? What's your success rate? I think that's the way they usually say. And I'll tell you, I struggled with that. Thought, well, every kid who comes is, in some form or fashion, is a success. But then I also know that we send guys home, and sometimes it doesn't go well. But I also realize that when we send some of those guys home, that we don't control a lot of things that make it unsuccessful. And then finally, God may not talk to you like he does me, but finally he said, hey, dummy, and that usually gets my attention. He said, you're answering the wrong question. And I said, okay, God, what's the question I ought to be answering? He said, Troy, he said, nowhere in my Bible do I call you to be successful. But what I do call you to be is to be faithful. And that's what your staff at the Tennessee Baptist Children's Home, all across, all the way from Kingsport, Chattanooga, Brentwood, Bartlett, Oakdale, and Millington at the Boys Ranch, that's what we're seeking to do every day, is to be faithful. Not every kid who comes through our campus prays to receive Christ. We've been blessed. Since November 1, 10 young men have prayed to receive Christ on our campus, and about 35 to 40, because it changes. I don't want to say a number and not be right. Somewhere between 35 and 40 across the state this year. But not every young man and not every child who comes to Tennessee Baptist Children's Home is going to pray to receive Christ. I know that. But this is what I also know. They'll leave knowing how, when they decide, if they decide. And that's what we're responsible for. That's why we're faithful to share, to care, and love. So I don't worry about being successful, because that's not really my objective. I want to make sure that I'm faithful. But I want to give you one last little thought, because this thought just blows my mind. You and I one day are going to be in heaven. And when we're there, there's going to be some teenage boys, some teenage girls, some little boys and little girls. And they're going to be there. And you're going to have a part in why they're there. Certainly Christ does the same, and I certainly would never take a part of that. But because you prayed, because you gave, because you come, because you allow folks to share, you have peace in that. Don't ever forget that. I'm not saying they couldn't have got saved somewhere else, but I'm telling you they get saved here. And I'm convinced that some of them probably wouldn't have any other way. And you and I get a piece of that. You and I have a part in that. I'm so honored and so humbled by that we get an opportunity to be a part of that God would see fit to allow us to do that. And I just want to say, I wish I could open up my heart and you'd see it, but I just want to say thank you so much that you, as Tennessee Baptist, won't let the call go unanswered for hurting families and their children. Appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm going to turn it over to Brother Lynn, so you come on. Thank you.